This is Jilliana Ranicar-Breese, and this is part 3 of my conversation with the writer David Benedictus. So, David, tell me about your life briefly in America, in Iowa.
Yes, the State University of Iowa is called one of the Big Ten. The highest paid man on the campus was the football coach, and he managed to oust the dean of sport and took his job and took his salary. But the thing that got to me really was the fact that after Oxford, 3 years at Oxford, Iowa did seem a little bit, well, provincial is not the right word exactly. But for instance, there was a considerable amount of racial prejudice in Iowa City. Very few black students there anyway. But I befriended a guy called Horace, who was Ghanaian, and who told me all sorts of things, like he couldn't get his hair cut in Iowa City because they wouldn't accept black people. Iowa City was also the place where the mayor of the city was elected on the platform of banning Playboy from the newsstands. It was a
Very
surprising
conservative.
thing. Horace was interesting because years later he came to London, and he let me know he was coming to London with his wife and his 2 little boys. And I said, well, what would he like to do while he was in London? And he said, well, what they all wanted to do was travel on the top of a bus. So I arranged to meet them at Charing Cross Station and wait for a double-decker bus. And when one came along, we climbed on the top deck. And Horace was engaged in a violent conversation with somebody. And I was very worried because I thought he might be getting something of the sort of thing he was used to in Iowa. And so when the bus started, I said to him, Horace, I hope that wasn't embarrassing. What was that all about? He said, well, I don't know. He said it was a woman who came up to me and said, well, at least you're not as bad as the Welsh. So, anyway, so that was Iowa. And after Iowa, I travelled around in America. I got a job driving a car back to Boston. And then in New England, I had some rich relatives, so they looked after me until I came home again.
Of course, Americans always make a fuss over the British.
They certainly do, yes.
Yeah, they love the British, and they love to tell you their heritage.
They certainly, well, their heritage was pretty good. They're the brother of the woman who was the householder in the house that I was being put up in, was John Van Druten, the playwright. And so there was a big theatrical connection amongst my American relatives. I got back to England. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. The phone went one day, and it was a woman called Miriam Lane,
yes.
whose married name that was. She'd married a Hungarian airman during the war, but her real name was Miriam Rothschild. She was the head of the English branch of the family and a noted biologist, a very eccentric woman. She was very tall. She wore a long silk dress with Wellington boots underneath. She played squash and cricket for England, and she had written books on biology which had been bestsellers. She was surrounded by children with various teachers and maids and bed makers and goodness knows what. And she interviewed me because Oberon Waugh had been the tutor, and they were fed up with him. And my interview took the form of a game of ping pong with her 12-year-old son Charlie. And Charlie just beat me at ping pong. They had their own table. And Miriam gave me the job because she said, referring to the ping pong match, she said the Rothschilds like to win, but they like to be given a good game.
That's a good quote.
Very good quote. I went to Switzerland with them, where they had 2 chalets, one for the French branch of the family and one for the English. And the Frenchman, who was about my own age, was the Baron David de Rothschild, whom I liked very much. He was unbearably handsome, he was enormously rich, very sophisticated, and when I got to Paris on my way home, I ran into him by chance in the Grand Guignol theatre where they did horror plays, and he said, you must come to lunch with us in the Avenue Foch, number 21 Avenue Foch, and he said it's a very informal lunch, but there was a footman behind each chair, and as the wine was served, the footman would whisper into my ear the name of the vintage, all of them from the Rothschild vineyards, of course. And I was very proud So that I said to David, well, thank you, lovely lunch. Will you come and have lunch with me? It's my turn. He said, all right. But I said, you know Paris better than I do, so why don't you choose a nice place and we'll have lunch? And he chose a little boîte, which was on the right bank, and I met him there. And I was a bit alarmed because the menu, which looked quite chic, there were no prices against the meal.
Oh dear.
And sure enough, when the bill came, I couldn't begin to pay it with all my remaining traveller's checks. And so I explained this to David, and he passed me a wad of notes under the table. And when I became incoherent with gratitude, he said, don't worry, David. He said, that's what the Rothschilds are for, which I thought was a very sweet thing for him to say.
Is he still alive?
I think he probably is. I think
You're not in touch.
And then, after I'd been in Switzerland with them, and where I had the use of 2 Olympic skiers to coach me, because they had been hired for the family and they never used them, I went to Israel with the family as well, and they had got tickets for the Eichmann trial. And being in Israel with the Rothschilds, and moreover being explained, my presence was explained not by being their tutor, but the assumption that I must be the next oldest Rothschild. So I was greeted with great, they were very impressed with me, made life very...
Did you feel you would like to live in Israel? Or
Not really.
Or spend more time in Israel?
Not really. Israel was tiny in those days, and some years later I got a writer-in-residence job at a kibbutz between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv called Kibbutz Gezer. It was an American kibbutz, largely inhabited by American college graduates, and I spent a very strange period of time in the kibbutz, and they wanted me while I was planting the vineyards, because when the rains came you had to get them in quickly. I also had time off to put on a play, which is what they wanted me to do. I chose a play by Sam Shepard, put a sign up asking for volunteers, and the only 4 who signed up were all men, and the play was about 2 married couples after the bomb dropped. And
Which
the
bomb?
rabbi on the kibbutz was one of the 4. He was noted for being a vegetarian, and the play called for him to eat a strip of chicken, as they said after the bomb. So the whole of the kibbutz turned out to see whether the rabbi was going to eat meat.
And did he?
Which he did, and a great sigh went up. As for the sake of art, he broke it. I got an email from him only the other day, and I was nice to know that he was still alive. His synagogue wasn't really a synagogue that you would recognise. It was more like a gymnasium with weightlifting equipment and things of that sort. So that was the Rothschilds, and at the same time that I was teaching their children, which wasn't always easy, they had one daughter, Charlotte, who was 8, and who had the most extraordinary bright red hair, and that skin that goes with very red hair, very pale, almost translucent skin, who had suicidal tendencies. So when we were skiing, she threatened that if she wasn't looked after, she would ski straight into the high tension wires, and she might well have done that too. After my introduction to the high life with the Rothschilds, I wrote my first, well, it was my second novel. I'd written one in America, but no one was going to publish that one. And this was about my time at Eton. It was a piece of revenge literature called The 4th of June. And a young publisher just starting out, called Anthony Blonde, published it. And
it became a big success.
It became a very big success indeed. It was banned at
Banned
Eton.
in Oxford,
It was
Eton.
Partly a success because Ian Fleming had a half page in the Sunday Times and called it the best first novel since the war. And that, coming from Ian Fleming, was worth quite a few copies. It sold out quickly. They only published 5,000 in the first edition, and I did it a little later as a play in the West End.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, David. We'll continue in the next episode. Thank you.